On behalf of the Stanford Transformation Network, I would like to welcome you to our premier event where we are all gathered here today to discuss ideas and measures to navigate through this crisis. On behalf of my fellow executives, I'd like to say thank you for coming today. And my name is Emmanuel Intim, the General Manager of Fund Packaging. Now, without further ado, I would like to get started by thanking our partners here today, being Spectra Global, Type Company, the Automation Group Ghana, Emigo Limited, Design and Technology Institute, Joy Sam Limited, Inkulenu Industries, Paradox, Happy Kids Schools, Incept Architectural Consult, Cleaning Solutions, African Concrete Products Limited, and the Ghana Stock Exchange. Without these partners, we would not be able to have this event. So thank you very much to them all. Now, a brief background to why the Stanford Seed Business Conference. This conference is organized by our chapter to help empower businesses to scale up, both in good times and bad times. I guess we can all agree that now we're in unprecedented times in Ghana, and we're very delighted to have a number of titans of industry here with us today who are going to take us through their life experiences, their crystal balls, what they're showing them, and advise us on what exactly we need to do. So to get us started, I'd like all of us to welcome with a round of applause our president, Madam Linda Amper, to give us the keynote address before we get started.
Incoming Managing Director, Madam Abena Amoa, distinguished speakers and panelists, Dr. Edusa Akodie, Madam Nana Madowona, Lawyer Ofusu Dote, incoming President and executives, Mr. Carl Richards and your team. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here today as the Stanford Seed Transformation Network Ghana chapter organizes its business conference that seeks to empower businesses to scale up. On behalf of SSTN Ghana executives and members, I do warmly welcome you, and I hope that the discussions and interactions and insights will help us all in navigating the economic crisis as we proceed on our respective and collective business transformation journeys. Sincere appreciation goes to our speakers and panel members and invited personalities who are going to serve as resource persons for this morning. I also acknowledge sponsors, Stanford Seed, and the many network members and Ghana Stock Exchange who have made this possible. The past 2 years have brought a lot of challenges that has changed the way we create, organize, and do business. Recent global and local economic disruptions have presented dire challenges for businesses in developing economies like ours. Some have completely folded up, while others are on the verge of collapsing. We are, however, grateful to God for the resilience and ability to create and innovate in these times. We have gathered here today to continue to pursue initiatives and activities that will contribute to enhancing and developing Ghana's economy. I am confident that through our deliberations today, participants will gain new perspectives and practical strategies to upscale and transform their businesses. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today's conference contributes immensely to our objective to create learning environments that enable companies to leapfrog. It is also in line with our mission to transition local companies into international players walking alongside member companies through the journey of transformation and paving the way for others to follow. In contributing to the main objective of this year's conference, which is themed Growth Opportunities Within the Crisis, we will hear from our speakers who are also practitioners and those with experiential knowledge who will share with us information, deep insights, and nuggets that we can always fall back on or reference as we traverse the current economic crisis. Today, as we all know, the Ghanaian business environment has become very challenging. There's the general high cost of doing business due to the depreciation of the cedi, a high debt burden, inflation, high interest rates, and the rising cost of energy, increased possibilities of the risk of lower growth due to the threats of the current global recession and the rising cost of food and imports. This meeting will provide alternative viewpoints and direction to business owners on how to see and leverage opportunities within the current environment. Distinguished participants, I would like to encourage the regulators and managers of the business environment in Ghana to closely follow our discussions. This will enable businesses to drive and contribute even better to Ghana's GDP. This is because our member companies, made up of over 120 SMEs spread across 15 sectors, are contributing immensely to Ghana's development and national agenda, aligned with the SDGs. Our member companies have created dignified and fulfilling jobs, contributed to poverty reduction, quality education, quality water, creating partnerships and networks that continue to ensure that Ghana is a peaceful country for business, among others. We can contribute better if our regulators provide quality services to the entire business ecosystem, as opposed to the current approach, and welcome businesses as real partners for national development. I wish to thank all our invited guests who have honored our invitation, as well as all of you distinguished participants online and here present, who are here with us today, either or any of the platforms available, Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom. Let us all make the best of the day as we deliberate and network and also share ideas. Thank you for your kind attention, and you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Linda. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for the day. I personally came across Mr. David Ofosu-Dorte through his Crystal Ball events. And these events kind of gave insight into what to expect as a business professional in the next year, how to plan out your business, how to move forward, how to adjust. So I'm particularly excited to hear what he has to say today. Without further ado, please welcome with a round of applause Mr. David Ofosu-Dorte.
Hello. can't see the slides anymore. Asking me to just. Okay. Good morning, everyone. If I had an introduction right, I'm supposed to be the keynote speaker. And then I think I saw in the program that I was supposed to give keynote address. In the days when I used to listen to a lot of keynote addresses, there were speeches which were being read with a lot of quotations from various eminent persons. But the challenge we have is that I've never read a speech before. Absolutely never. I'm unable to. So, pardon me if you were expecting a speech, I don't have one. But I'm here to speak about growth in the crisis. Let me check the time so that we try and do the 20 minutes that has been allotted. Some experts have described the situation we are in the world generally as VUCA. In other words, it is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it largely reflects the world in which we find ourselves today. Quite volatile because things tend to happen rather unexpectedly, and things tend to take turns that we were not predicting for them to take. So it creates a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty affects us in various ways, including our businesses and how our businesses perform. And therefore, in a world of crisis, as the Stanford seed theme portrays, if we want to see growth, then we have to be looking at how the VUCA world is playing out and how we perform in it. Now, the slide shows quite a number of events which are all happening at the same time as I captured them. So on the right side, post-Brexit issues, high cost of gas prices in Europe, work from home or work from office, depending. IMF, and Ghana is not the only one at IMF. Russia-Ukraine war, recession. Well, technically, some countries are already in recession because they have had negative growth for 2 quarters, but have not officially declared recession. That doesn't include Ghana anyway. We are not in recession, at least not yet. Food shortage, and I don't expect one in Ghana, by the way. Government lack of funds. So these are all the kind of things that keep playing on our minds every day. But on the other side of that same, spectrum or ecosystem, you see digitization, Pan-African payment systems, AFCFTA, new supply chains, currency depreciation happening at the same time, fintech revolution, infrastructure trends. So all these things are happening at the same time in this VUCA world. And it is in this VUCA world that we still expect growth, especially with recession threatening and with the Ukraine-Russia war dragging beyond what many people expected and its impact, depending on how you view it. We have various viewpoints regarding what is happening around us. But as Albert Einstein said, in the midst of every crisis lies opportunity. Are there opportunities, especially opportunities for growth in this crisis that we find ourselves? Let's look at some data. And this data is courtesy of the Afro Champions organization, of which I'm a member. So there are a lot of data on the screen, but I will touch just on a few. Feeding the people is one area that a lot of people play in that sector, and I've already met a couple of people in this room who are already in the food sector. Now, urban food imports for Africa alone was $35 billion and is projected to reach $110 billion by 2025 and $150 billion by 2030. In other words, as Africa urbanizes continuously, import of urban foods is increasing. Now, urban foods has a certain peculiarity. It's likely to be packaged, it's likely to be desired fast, it's likely to be delivered to the urban dweller where he or she is. So you notice, for example, that during the COVID, some restaurants closed down, but food delivery increased. And therefore, even in the midst of the COVID crisis, some opportunities emerged for other people, and that's for urban foods only. And again, if you are looking at the wrong data, you may be looking at the fact that Africa used to be dominated by rural communities. It used to be 70-30 and moved to 55-45. Actually, the urban-rural divide has reversed in many African countries, including Ghana. But I see a lot of people still quoting the old data. There are more urban areas in Ghana now than there are rural areas. And the urban dweller has a different type of demand than the rural dweller. So that affects how you see the situation and what role you play in. And I just touch on urban food imports alone, just as an example. Now, if you take a look at movements, you'll see that the urbanization trend has also created the need for movements that connects many urban areas. And indeed, somebody has described that West Africa, perhaps, may be the first part of the world which will create what they call the megapolis. A megapolis is bigger than a metropolis. And the megapolis, the person describes this as Abidjan, Accra, Lagos, Benin, Lomé corridor. They tend to be merging in terms of the break between these many cities on that stretch is actually reducing by the interconnection of number of business entities on that corridor, which is not surprising why, for example, the African Development Bank has recently voted $16 billion to do the Abidjan-Lagos corridor highway. Now, that type of demand raises as much as 200 billion in terms of movements by road alone in Africa. Not to talk about the fact that by the end of this November, when the world becomes 1.8 billion people, becomes 8 billion people, Africa will be 1.4 billion. About 70% of the world's population, exactly that of China and that of India, except that we are cut into pieces and therefore we are not taking advantage of the size. But it's important to also recognize that by 2030, we will be 1.6 billion people, and that is 1.6 billion people to clothe. That's a huge market for the clothing industry. A lot of people underrate how much is demanded in hand-woven clothes, like kente and batakari, for example. And the demand around Africa and in the US is quite high. But again, it is a largely unexplored sector. That, of course, impacts on tourism, etc., and takes manufacturing from where it is to a potential $1 trillion industry on the continent. And this is just data I decided to share. Let me share a couple more. Broadband is expected to reach 1.07 billion in terms of individuals who are demanding it. And that increases the amount of financing options as well as the amount of opportunities because it coincides with digitization, and that also opens other areas of industry. Footwear and apparel alone is projected to hit 31 billion also by 2025. And these are all Africa figures compiled. And these are real figures. These are figures which are actually certified by independent organizations. And it was compiled by the Champions Organization as part of looking at the private sector component of the AFCFTA. Now, what does this mean? What it means is that when an African business is looking at their normal SWOT and PESTEL that they do in their exercises to develop their strategy, they ought not just to be looking at the traditional things, but they ought to be looking at things which are happening. Yes, of course, we will look at the fourth industrial revolution, and we will look at artificial intelligence and all that, but we have to look at the one Africa market that, for example, the AFCFTA creates, as an example. And there's a lot talked about that, so I'm not going to go into that. What is important at this stage, before I move to the next point, is for us to understand that it creates a new ecosystem. And the ecosystem of how we do business is completely different from how it used to be. Let me just relate the example of the PAPS, which is already operational. It is possible now to actually buy flowers from Nairobi and pay cedis and have the person receive it in Kenyan shillings. It's already operational. It is possible today to buy in Chima, in Zambia, and pay Ghanaian cedis and have been received in Kwacha. So is it possible for somebody to buy an item from Ghana, a batakari, and pay Naira, and you receive it in cedis? It's already happening. It's not imaginary. So in the midst of this crisis, there are actually opportunities for you to play a role in a larger market. And many, especially those in the services sector, are not even aware that hopefully by the end of next year, there will be a single services market in Africa. And that's a reality. And again, for the avoidance of doubt, already the likes of transportation, banking services, tourism, business development services, there's a fifth one, which it just escapes me. But that fifth one constitutes already an operational single services system that you can take advantage of on the continent. When I meet people who are still thinking so much about Ghana, this 31 million market, I'm not so sure why. Because we are talking about a 1.4 billion market. I'm not expecting that you see and necessarily tap into the opportunity by simply expanding, no. But you can fit yourself into the value chain of a larger market whilst remaining in your small market. And that's what is important that we understand. Okay, moving away from the large market. In crisis, there are certain things which are very important for us to understand. And the key thing I want to draw attention to is for us to ensure that we have the right crisis mindset. Now, it doesn't mean we don't recognize the crisis, but it means we react to the crisis differently. Because if you react to the crisis wrongly, you are not likely to be able to see the growth or even see the opportunities. Or even if you see the opportunities, you are not likely to be able to tap into those opportunities. What do I mean by this? Many confuse knee-jerk reaction with reacting properly. Now, in crisis, you can react knee-jerk. A knee-jerk reaction is a reaction which is not thought through. But if you confuse that with reflex action, you will assume that every knee-jerk reaction is reflex action. A reflex action is what happens when there is an immediate danger, unexpected, and the body or the mind unconsciously reacts. And that reaction is always right. Reflex action is always right. Reflex action is never wrong. A knee-jerk reaction is not unconscious. A knee-jerk reaction is a conscious decision made by a person who is reacting to crisis unprepared. And because that person is unprepared, he takes an action, or he or she takes an action that is very easy or provides a small screen for what is otherwise the suffering he or she wants to avoid. And we shouldn't mix the two. And a mindset crisis is very important if you have to survive, not just crisis, but to thrive in it. Because when crisis appears, there are four things that you must recognize. The first one is to ensure that there is no deterioration. The second one is to ensure that you survive the crisis. The third one is to ensure that you find out options that will enable you grow within the crisis. And the last one is actually to take advantage and grow. Now, for those of you who follow my tweets, and I tweet very regularly, my tweet this morning mentioned something about the fact that in the end, leaders do not regret for lack of vision. And when I say leaders, I'm not referring to political leaders. We always tend to think about political leaders. Business leaders are also leaders. Leaders do not regret for lack of vision, nor do they regret for lack of opportunity. They regret for not implementing the vision. And they regret for the excuses they gave themselves for not implementing the vision. And the diversion that they pay attention to, which gets opportunity wasted. That's what actually leaders regret for. Because in the midst of crisis, if you pay too much attention to the crisis and you have the wrong crisis mindset, you are likely to pay attention to the divergent things which will let you miss opportunity. And that is why I thought I should draw attention to this. Okay, so having laid that foundation, the following are important. It's important that to have the right mindset to be able to grow within the crisis, you differentiate empty optimism from positive optimism. Positive optimism is when you have a plan. And as a businessman, and I'm assuming everybody here is a businessman, when you have a plan, you are working towards it. Crisis, okay. You look at the plan, what changes to make? What are the things we need to do as a result of the crisis? You borrowed money in cedis, and the dollar is affecting it. Is it possible to ask your banks to renegotiate so that you pay later? Or if you have money saved, do you want to retire it quickly? Etc. Whatever plan that you have, but there's a plan to follow. So based on that plan, you are optimistic and you believe that you make changes and you have hope that the positive will come out, because in the long run, things will turn out for the better. Things always turn out for the better. I happen to be in the business where we advise investors, and I've always told investors that Ghana go through a cycle, regular cycle of ups and downs. Some cycles are worse than the others, obviously. And I've also made this point over and over. Anytime you, and you can check this, anytime you are told one country is Africa's fastest growing economy, I guarantee you 5 to 7 years they will be at IMF. I've said this over and over, and I want somebody to dispute that fact. Every time any country becomes the fastest growing economy, 5 to 7 years, they will be at IMF. In a different forum, I will explain why that happens. But it's a cycle. So as soon as I see Zambia is now growing very fast, I can project when they will go to IMF. If they do the same mistakes that people keep doing, and we keep repeating those mistakes. I wonder why any African country thinks that being the fastest growing economy is something which is nice. It is not. When we have on this continent a proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. What is the beauty of being the fastest growing economy if you are going to be dragged down in a short run? Anyway, let's move on. But that's for positive optimism. When you have a plan and you are implementing the plan. Empty optimism is an optimism which is based on nothing at all. You have no plan. You simply are optimistic that things will turn out well. What is that optimism about? It only happens when you are holed up in the wilderness and you expect manna. But when you have resources, God doesn't deliver manna in that way. And that optimism in crisis does not help anybody. Now, the second thing is to check whether you are recession-minded or growth-minded in your optimism. Because recession-minded means that things are going to keep getting worse. And at times, it is the mind which prevents you from spotting opportunities. I'll tell you a short story. I've forgotten where I read the story, but it's about a gentleman during the Great Depression who lived somewhere in the United States. I've forgotten which city, but who sent his son to Harvard. Not Stanford. The story didn't say Stanford. I'm just telling you the story as it is. So it's nothing to do with. And this gentleman had a grocery shop on some highway, and he had put a mile before the grocery shop free ice water. Remember, the Great Depression was in the 20s, so fridges were not as common as, and ice water was quite. So it's summertime, free ice water 1 mile ahead. And this guy's grocery was booming because people who are driving on the highway get to the grocery shop, they buy their grocery, and they stop there because they will get free ice water. And the business was booming. His son returns from Harvard after his first year in economics and asked the father, how is your business? And the father was an illiterate, by the way. How is your business booming in the midst of the recession and this Great Depression? And the father asked, what is depression? He explains it to him, how the whole world is, everything is reversing and people are not investing. By the time he came back home for the next semester, the business was dead. The father removed the free ice water ahead. He stopped from investing. This is a true story. It's not a joke. It's a true story. The mindset you use to react to crisis can prevent you from seeing opportunities. It can actually kill your business. So, is it recession only you see or opportunities for growth within the recession? That mindset is. And are you looking for competition or dominance? In a recession, that is not the time to compete. Or in difficult times, that is not time to compete because everybody is panicking. That is the time to look for areas that you dominate. And you need to understand how to dominate because there are areas that are always on tap, especially in Africa, that you can enter and there are very little competition. Okay, having said that, on this continent, I want us to understand that there are two separate Africas. I've talked about that over and over. They are completely two separate Africas. The most popular Africa is the one that they actually talk a lot about our leaders and the mistakes they make and all the rest. That occupies the front pages of the Western media and CNN and BBC and all that, and the hunger and all that. That's the popular Africa. But the other Africa, which is actually bigger than this Africa, is the one you have the youth entrepreneurship, startups, a lot of entrepreneurs doing marvelous things who are unable to scale because they don't have access to capital, etc. The likes of a problem that the likes of Dr. Andani are trying to solve. That Africa includes the fact that 750 companies in Africa now make more than $500 million turnover per annum. This figure used to be less than 200 just 15 years ago. It also includes the fact that 500 companies in Africa are making over $1 billion per annum. And this figure used to be less than 200 or so just 10 years ago. This Africa doesn't get reported. In fact, even for the big media who want to do Marketplace Africa and Africa Voices, half of their presentation is about dancing and theater and all that. Doesn't mean that is bad, but it means they are not showing the manufacturing side. They are showing only one side of the continent. And it's important that we pay attention to that and spot the other opportunities. Now, long and short, I want us to understand that in this crisis, there are 5,000 areas, and this is not an imaginary figure. There are 5,000 minimum areas in Africa that you can compete or dominate. Whether you are able to spot opportunities in these 5,000 areas depends completely entirely on your crisis mindset. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looks like it was too short for our liking. We wanted more. I was wondering. Anyway, good morning again. My name is Jemima Nate. You can call me Jemima, and I'm the CEO of the Happy Kids Schools. So we are moving on with the next one, which is the guest speaker's address. I've been looking through his profile, very long, very good, but I'm just going to say a few things, and I believe that you look through in your book. So he is Dr. Edu Sarkodie, the group chairman of CDH Group. I realized that he is also serving on several boards, but for me, what struck me so much was the last part. Most importantly, Dr. Edu Sarkodie is an ambassador of Jesus Christ. He is a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ and a pastor at the Reconciliation Ministry. And why has it struck me so much? At the end of it all, after all that we do, something really makes us stand out most. Dr. Edu Sarkodie, please come over and speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. Just like my senior brother, I do not intend to do slides. Actually, when I got this invitation, I told myself, what do you tell your colleagues who know all that you know? I mean, whatever it is that you know and the way you run your business. And we do run quite a lot of business. We are into cocoa. We had a steel company. We had a finance house. We had a brokerage house, a health insurance company, a general insurance company, and the 3 hotels that we ran. And a bit of agribusiness, which we later converted to become the buffer stock, which is now owned by government. So having run all these things and with people who also run these institutions, what do you tell them? So I decided that, well, I will share my personal story of growth in crisis. I took the topics and said, growth. Well, growth seems quite easy, but I was going through what a crisis really meant. And I thought a crisis was easy to define until last week. I took a vacation and I like to explore. So I went to the Western Sahara, the place called Layun, where the Polisario Front operates. I told my driver to just take me to the Sahara Desert. I just wanted to explore. And I met black Africans with cloth tied around them, bottles of water, and walking by the road. Initially, I didn't quite understand, so I asked my driver, I said, well, they've trekked, some of them from Senegal, some are from your country. I said, I don't think so. We'll find out what happened. In the end, we tracked down 3 of them who didn't look frightening, and we stopped. I started a discussion. 2 of them spoke French. One I thought was Ghanaian, but said he's not Ghanaian. Even though when a Ghanaian speaks English, you can tell that he's Ghanaian. Because the moment a Ghanaian says, as for me, you know he's a Ghanaian. So I spent quite some time with them. Of course, I parted with some money, and I said, now, you are in a crisis. This is the Sahara Desert. From Layun to Marrakesh, where I was based, is about 1,200 kilometers. What are you doing here? And what he said struck me, that a crisis definition is not that simple. What he told me in Chi, later he leveled up with me, was that here he has hope. Hope that when he gets there, wherever the there was, I don't know. When he gets there, things will be well. Back home, he had no hope, and that was a crisis. Of course, I didn't agree with him, but I didn't stop him. After a discussion, I continued my journey. I met the Moroccan police. I asked them, why do you let these boys cross? They said, well, they have journeyed 3,000 kilometers to this place to walk. If we turn them back, they commit crime. If we let them go forward, they just walk through our country with no crime. They have hope. So I realized that the definition of their crisis is where there is no hope. But this morning, my presentation hasn't got that particular definition, even though it's related. My definition of crisis is when the social structure is dislocated, and when the laws and what is happening don't just fit to enable you run your business. And that's the story I want to tell you. It starts on 2004, on the 9th of July, 2004. I came to work at CDH around 8 o'clock, and there was a truckload of policemen, about 30 of them, with about 4 soldiers, surrounding the whole CDH building. Whoa. What's the problem? Walks in the head of banking supervision, then Mr. Reginald France, and his team. And everything I'm saying is just factual, so I'll use the names. I've sought permission from some of them. They walk in and they go to our boardroom. We have taken over the company, surrender your license. Well, I was a junior officer by then. I was in management still. We didn't quite know what had happened. They did that. The following week, they made an announcement. Anybody who had money at CDH, come for your money. People lined up. They took the money away. Then they gave the company 90 days to recapitalize. Otherwise, the license is no longer in the moratorium. It's revoked. Wow. How did we get here? Well, CDH started as a discount house. Everybody here knows what a discount house is. It was a bank for banks. When banks, wanted to trade, in those days, banks were not trading among themselves. They were trading through the discount house. I have seniors here who will explain that better. And in that, it was a monopoly and traded for a bit. After a while, of course, Fidelity joined and SDC joined. Now, these 3 discount houses were operating. One has become a very successful bank. One is still struggling. The other is also not doing well. That's another story we can share later on, why this happened. But let me continue with my story. So, in between the 90 days, the board of directors met. They called in the shareholders and said, decided that this thing will not work anymore. Why? Because a law had been passed where banks could now trade among themselves. So really, the idea of a discount house was not relevant anymore. And in fact, the discount house had then, without going back to its original vision, decided that we'll do what its shareholders were doing, go into lending. So it had lent money to Ghana Commercial Bank, and these are court cases, GNPC, and of course GNPA. Now, if you have shareholders who are doing exactly what you are doing, what interest would they have in you? And remember, their shareholding was in very small numbers. So what happened? In the end, when Ghana Airways was put into liquidation, it meant that the company was no longer able to trade properly. And that had led to the intervention by Central Bank. Back to the story. So the shareholders were put together. Are you prepared to put money in this? Of course, we all know the answer, isn't it? No. The purpose for the company did not exist any longer. So they said, well, let's put the company into official liquidation and let's end the story. A real crisis. I was sitting in the room there because my brother-in-law, who had then come as a Commonwealth technical advisor to them to set up the discount house, had some small shares in the company. I was in the room. They said, well, let's vote to put the company into official liquidation. So I put my hand up and mustered all my power of speech that the Holy Spirit could help me to convince them that there was something that could be done about this situation. And by God's grace, all these MDs of Barclays, Enterprise, SIC, Commercial Bank, SNIT, what other shareholders, everybody who mattered, SSB, they said, well, is that what you're saying? Okay, we make you the new executive chairman of CDH. Thank you very much. We wash our hands. Looked like a crisis, isn't it? But that was my opportunity to grow. So I took it up. My first thing was to talk to the clientele. We didn't have money. So I called somebody I knew in communications and said, Eric, come over. Let's see what we can do. We thought through, after several weeks, decided that we'll talk to our clients. We'll just say, gold does not rust. It only gets refined by fire. So let's put this out there. If anybody talks to us and says, what's happening to CDH? We will say, gold does not rust. It just gets refined by fire. We've been a monopoly. We've been around for such a long time, and we need some refinement. So we saw all this that is happening as a process of refinement. That's how we put it. And then we had about 100 workers to deal with, to pay. After a lot of painful, and one of the most painful things I've done in my life. My colleagues, my work. Remember, I was working there. All of a sudden, I'd become executive chairman. I had to come to work one day and sign over 90-something letters terminating everybody's appointment. So you have to be bold in times of crisis. After making that decision, we were left with 3 workers. Those 3 workers started the process all over again. We were knocking on the doors of the central bank, knocking on the doors of SEC. I'm very happy the MD is here. It was then Dr. Charles Assembly, knocking on their doors and trying hard to get the companies opened. After, again, calling on the shareholders to help. How did the shareholders help? We owed the shareholders some money because we are then taking monies from Ghana Commercial Bank and SIC to give to GNPC and GNP and all that. These are all court records, so there's nothing hidden. And in the end, we got them to do what we call a debt-to-equity transaction. So they did that, and then we presented our documentation to the central bank and said, well, we had money to do a debt-to-equity transaction, and so we were sort of solvent now. Of course, Dr. Akwa was having none of that. He and Dr. Siedumante, none of that. They were not going to listen to that at all. One morning we woke up, and they said, well, company was over. Registrar General put up a notice, Registrar of Company put up a notice in the papers, the Daily Graphic, CDH in official liquidation. Ooh. Dead. Okay. I went to my lawyers, said, but this thing is not fair. Because we're trying, we still think we can pick it up. You know, my senior said something about having a positive mind. Said, no, this thing is not fair. We went to see the register of companies, Mr. Redu Jampo, and then in the end we went back to court. And by the grace of God, we managed to reverse that again. So then we're not in liquidation anymore, but the moratorium imposed by Bank of Ghana was still in place, so we couldn't trade. Between 2004 and 2006, we got the brokerage house back, and of course the insurance company, CDH Insurance, also came back to work. The big one was the discount house. Because the main debt it had was with Ghana Airways, which itself was in liquidation as well. After a lot of battles with the liquidator of the I have just 20 minutes. Liquidator of Ghana Airways, we got shares in Accra City. That's how come CDH still owns a majority in Accra City. That's another story. We got shares in Accra City and ownership of Airways Catering. Now, me and my accountant and a security guy in charge of Airways Catering. Man, that's another crisis. Of all the work I have done in my life, that was the most difficult work. In the end, we sold it off. Because, please, don't do what you don't have the skill to manage. So we sold it off. We got some Kenyans and we sold it off to them and raised some liquidity. Out of the liquidity, we went back to Governor Aqua again. We said, listen, we now have converted our debt into equity. We have these shares in Accra City then. It was then Novotel. And we have this liquidity. Can you give us back our license? He said, no, come back again. We kept going every week. One day we went and he said, you know what? You've been bothering me a lot. Go and see this new young governor. He probably can hear your story and whatever he says, I'll work with it. So I go in there, new young governor, looks like me. We have a chat. After about 45 minutes, he says, well, but this is doable. I said, yes. He said, so why are you not? I said, because you are, I'm under moratorium. He says, okay, you go. I'll talk to the governor about it. The following week, we saw in the papers that the moratorium on CDH had been lifted. The deputy governor, first deputy governor, was no other person than our current vice president, Dr. Baumia. And I'm not preaching, no, I'm not. He was the one who was handling that issue. Now, then we made the biggest mistake that we shouldn't have made as a company. When we got the moratorium lifted, we said, what can we do? All we should have done was go back to our vision. And the vision is to be purposeful, is to be relevant to the Ghanaian sector. You know what we did? We said, UT Financial Services, they are making a lot of money by doing predatory lending. Let's go and get a finance house and follow them. That was not in our vision at all. We stayed away from our vision. So I understood exactly when you said, go after the vision. Refine the vision and go after that. We didn't do that. What did we do? We looked for a finance house and bought it. We built it on, let's make money. So when the current storm hit, guess what it hit? That finance house was hit. And we learned our lesson. So my little experience I want to share with my colleagues is this. Well, the story does go on because we did things that we shouldn't have done and things that we were right in doing. Now, one of the biggest challenges is we were misled by the legal regime. See, anytime they change the legal regime, go back to your vision. Work within the law, but don't let the legal regime lead you. So, when we had the finance house, in those days, your assets, whether financial or non-financial, was added to you and you could trade. The moment they passed the 930 and said that your assets, non-financial assets, should be separate from your assets, we were caught without anything to hold on. Why? because we didn't stay with our vision. We went to look for money. And that thing caught us totally out of order. And we had what? Is it a year to sell? They gave us a year to sell. And those were the days when you couldn't sell anything, like now. So we're caught down. So first thing is, when there's a new law, the management of that law must be done by you. If the law says all discount houses must become finance houses, is that what you were set out to do? Look at it very well. Maybe from that point, we should have just shut down anything lending, because we're never set up for lending, and concentrated on maybe brokerage businesses with the SEC, and today probably have been one of the most powerful institutions trading across Africa. But we did the wrong thing. My 20 minutes time is up, but I want to leave you with something. Stay with the vision. Stay with the vision. And as a man of faith, I would say, pray a lot. Because things don't align in this town. The legal regime, the business regime are not properly aligned. And as for the cycles of change, as my senior said, they will come all the time. Because, a crisis is precipitated by two things. Success by itself, and this is my experience, creates an anti-success. Everything that goes up will come down. I see my TA here. She doesn't know that. She taught me. She's looking right at me. Yes, you were my TA. Everything that goes up will come down. And so success itself will breed anti-success. So after this will be another one. And if we choose to call it a crisis, so it is. I call it pruning. And there are many growth opportunities within pruning. He has done a lot of it, and I need not say anything. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, and at least I'm going home with one thing. Stay with the vision. I believe we've all picked one or two things from what has been said so far. So we'll move on to the next, which is going to be a panel discussion. After that, we're going to have an open forum. I just want to keep you abreast with what is going to happen. So after the open forum, we would have a group photo before we eventually go out for lunch. And so now, the panel discussion. Our panel discussion is going to be moderated by Kofi Owusu-Insua, the director of Insano Limited, and also a member of Stanford Seed. Kofi Owusu-Insua is a highly skilled fintech entrepreneur and technology lawyer with over 16 years of professional experience and expertise in the provision, support, and regulation of financial services and payment systems in African markets, and a whole lot. I'm sure he's going to prove himself to us. Welcome, Kofi.
Thank you very much, Jemima. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. David Ofosudote, for the presentation. Thank you so much, Doc, for that story you shared. I think I've sought permission from the executive. In the interest of time, we will merge the sessions of the panel discussions and then the questions that we may want to solicit from the audience. So we will be able to do both concurrently. I have a little quotation here and a preamble just to set the stage for our conversation this morning. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. This quotation from the post-apocalyptic novel by Michael Hoppe sums up a very pervasive cyclical vision of the past and what has happened. While we are gathered here this morning to have this conversation and to identify what silver linings there are in times of crisis. I just want to take a few minutes to set the context, particularly linking it to the global economy, as Mr. Fosudote did. The global economy itself continues to face a very steep challenge. First and foremost, if you look at the IMF outlook for October 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its attendant energy and food crisis that's on one hand. And secondly, of course, the cost of living crisis, which is caused by persistent and broadening inflationary pressures. And the third one that perhaps will take a lot more direction from David on this is the slowdown in China, particularly because of their zero COVID policy. And of course, the fact that climate change itself has exacerbated, the heat wave and the shutting down of China's southeastern industrial and exporting hubs. And if you take a look at the size of China itself and its importance for global supply chains, then this will weigh very heavily on global trade. More than a third of the global economy will contract this year or the next, according to the IMF outlook, while the three largest economies of the United States, the European Union, and China itself will stall. Within the context of the just described global economy, we live and conduct business in a country called Ghana. And we heard earlier, Ghana has gone from being touted as the fastest growing economy, that's in 2019 in Africa, to having the worst performing currency in October 2022. Of course, after losing about 52% of its value against the US dollar. Now, when I say this, it sends a chill down my spine, because if people tout your country as being the fastest growing economy, perhaps it's a sign of what is to come, like David said. I will move straight to introduce a very distinguished panel we have this morning. We have met two of them already, so I won't do an elaborate reading of their profile. I'll do for the other two who will be joining us. But before then, I am told there is supposed to be a commercial break. So we'll take a quick commercial break and then we'll come back. I'll do the introductions. Thank you.
Your days of yearning for those home-tasting meals are over. You can now make palm soup conveniently from the comfort of your home with Nkulenu's Palm Soup Base. Or pick a bottle of deliciously fresh Nkulenu's Palm Drink. Nkulenu has now added mouth-watering Gar Kenke, Fanti Kenke, Banku, and chopped dry contom reliefs to its home products. All Nkulenu products are produced under strict hygienic conditions with no chemical preservatives. Nkulenu, original Ghanaian taste.
Kwame. He's a young executive who works long hours. His schedule makes it difficult for him to get a sit-down meal. He needs a quick fix meal which is healthy and wholesome. Yummy probiotic yogurt. It's creamy, delicious, and rich in proteins that are easily absorbed by your body. Yummy is that wholesome drinking yogurt that provides energy and vitality to make you come alive. Grab a cold bottle of Yummy at a shop near you and let the healthy feeling kick in. Available in different flavors. Yummy yogurt. Always different, truly different.
Since 1989, the Ghana Stock Exchange has brought together companies and investors to forward business growth.
Listing on the Ghana Stock Exchange helps companies raise much-needed long-term capital to finance strategic business objectives. Going public also institutes good corporate governance and sound business processes, which helps sustainability and continuity of businesses.
And that's what we are about. On the trading floor, the one goal is to make sure things work out for our business partners. And with the same expertise, we invite individuals to come buy shares on the Ghana Stock Exchange so that we can bring everyday people closer to the good fortunes they dream of. Come, do business with the Ghana Stock Exchange, where you can raise long-term capital for your business or buy shares. It's your time.
Talk to a licensed stockbroker for more information. Ghana Stock Exchange, bringing companies and investors together since 1989.
Thank you very much and welcome back. I will move straight to introduce the discussants, very distinguished personalities. I will introduce them in no particular order. Please allow me to first introduce the man under whose feet I did my pupillage as a young lawyer, David Ofosu-Dortey, who is arguably the most knowledgeable business lawyer in this country. Please put your hands together and invite him. David is a legal policy and transaction specialist with combined public and private sector consultancy experience spanning over 25 years. He runs the law firm AB and David, which has littered almost everywhere in Africa with offices. Every time we travel across the length and breadth of this continent, we find an AB and David law firm. I would also do a quick introduction of Mr. Edusa Akodie, Dr. Edusa Akodie, who happened to be my senior at the Gimpa Law School. So he is a businessman, a full businessman, and a very knowledgeable lawyer. He is the group chairman of the Intermarket Group of Companies. Under his leadership, the group has grown into a multi-business conglomerate of high-performing Ghanaian businesses, including Phoenix Insurance, CDH, Gilead Medical and Dental Center, Accra City Hotel, Peninsula Resort and Golf Club, and the Phoenix Health Insurance. Please put your hands together for Doc. We are also very, very privileged to have in our midst Dr. Al-Hassan Andani, who needs no introduction, but for the sake of our online audience, I will introduce him. He's beckoning me to not to do an elaborate introduction. A very modest man I have enormous respect for. Please put your hands together. He's the former MD of the Stanbic Bank Ghana. And just so you know, he is the grandson of Na and Dani, who ruled Dagbon in the colonial era. And then we have my learned senior and friend, Nanama Boche, who is the founder of N. Dowona and Company. Nanama is ranked as a leading lawyer in the Legal 500 Chambers and Partners and the International Financial Law Review. She has advised on numerous significant investments and divestments in Ghana and in other parts of Africa, including the over 200 million US dollars sale of Fan Milk International, the acquisition and development and divestment of the Mövenpick Ambassador Hotel. In a certain sense, we are actually here because of her. And of course, Leapfrog Strategic African Investments, over 180 million USD investments in the Enterprise Insurance Group. Nanama is a graduate of Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School undergraduate program, New York University's Stern School of Business, and Columbia University School of Law. Please put your hands together and invite Nanama to the stage. Nanama, I think there is a... Yes, let me help you. Please put your hands together. Okay. I have two microphones here. Start with you since you have a hard stop. So thank you so much, distinguished panel. And like I said, just to set the context, if there are questions, I'd like you to reach out to Daniel. Daniel, show my hand so we can see you. Daniel will help me coordinate questions from the audience in this room. While if you happen to be watching online and you have questions, you could put them in the comment section. We will try and pick them, and then we'll ask our very distinguished panel to deal with your questions. We'll start with David's presentation he did. Rather very short, very punchy, very straight to the point. David, just for us to be able to build context on the back of what you said, beyond the pinch in the living conditions of people in this room, beyond feeling the pinch in our pockets, what is really going on with the Ghanaian economy? What is really going on?
Sounds like you making me manager of the Ghanaian economy. I mean, from where I sit, I think we have still not started managing the Ghanaian economy. And when I say we as a people, I don't think we have. I can't see any of the fundamentals being tackled. We've still stuck to the symbolism, and that has nothing to do with this government. It's just a cycle of us not realizing that we are not doing what we are supposed to do. Everybody knows what we are supposed to do, but somehow we don't do it right. I don't know how many of you have watched the story, the video by President Obasanjo, where he talks about President Kufuor having tried to ban poetry, and he's being convinced to not to ban poetry, etc. And that story, some of us happen to be around when he told that story. And I've heard Obasanjo actually repeat that story elsewhere. But how were they able to do it, and Nigeria was able to do it, and we were not able to do it? Because two things happen, and unless we understand that, we will keep blaming NDC, MPP, NDC. And I mean, I've tweeted before that our story is like a group of people who enjoy blaming each other when the real enemy manipulates both of them to their misery. That's actually what is happening. Now, politicians, since we had the chance to do the so-called Fourth Republic, underestimate the problem and overestimate themselves. I want to repeat that. They always underestimate the problem and overestimate themselves. They tend to think that the problem is happening because of the person in power. And so far as I am in charge, I can do it better. So because of that, we overlook the causes of the problem. So we don't think of why and what causes the problem. We think of who is causing the problem. So we have believed that once you remove the who, the problem will be solved. The new person comes only to realize that the problem is the same. Of course, some people manage it better than others do, but the problem is basic. Recently, I was on some platform and I was so disgusted when two people, one MPP, one NDC, both were arguing as to who has gone to IMF more and whose IMF was better than the IMF. Can any IMF be better than another IMF? I don't get it. So, and I will illustrate something and then we can move on from there. The president said he wanted to make Accra the cleanest city, right? Now, let's assume that he actually decided that as part of that process, he will ban the use of polythene and plastics. Let's assume that. And Rwanda has done it. I want to ask you a question. If Asantehene, and I'm not using because of Asantehene in particular, but because I think he's a very powerful person. If Asantehene arrived at Kotoka International Airport carrying polythene bags, do you know any immigration officer or any policeman who can collect the polythene bag from him? The room is quiet. We are not a people who want to implement what we think we want to do because we underestimate the problem. We do not realize that even our traditional power itself at times can undermine what we want to achieve. And therefore, in order to be able to solve that problem and create all this economic mess, we need very, very fundamental changes. The attempt to create a small screen, and one of the things I really, really don't understand is why we think our problem is macroeconomic indicators. Our problem is not macroeconomic indicators. The macroeconomic indicators are symptoms that make us pretend that the problem has been solved. And every government is talking about macroeconomic indicators. I'm giving a long answer to a short question, but it's important because our thinking processes have never been questioned. I've done 2 programs recently, one of them with Dr. Andani, where I questioned why a whole central bank devotes its entire period to fight inflation. Why is inflation indexing necessary for a country like this? Read the World Bank's recent report. They have subtle hints to the effect that countries that have strong capital markets, inflation indexing may not necessarily be the right policy. And both Dr. Andani and myself talked about this on a program recently. The other thing which I want to use to illustrate our thinking process, which I think is what causes all the problem, is that we believe every useless theory that we have been taught. Now, the duty of education is to enable you to question and change the things around you. If your education causes you to repeat that which you were taught in school, the education has failed. And I've asked this several times. People say Ghanaians don't have a savings culture, and we believe it. I mean, a lot of those theories which really undermine us, you believe we don't have a savings culture. What is savings? Savings is simply that which you keep and bring up when you need. Okay, is there anybody in this room, including managing directors of banks, who don't have a grandmother who saves in jewelry, who saves in land, even in cloth? They used to call it dumas. Don't you know Ghanaians who have bought 4 houses and are broke and they are not ready to sell one? The culture keeps us from actually liquidating that money. So essentially, we don't have a culture of not saving. No, we have a culture of failing to turn that asset into liquid. But if you go to school and you believe that you have a savings culture, you actually create a situation where you are trying to create a savings culture in an economy which already has a savings culture, instead of creating a situation where people can turn their savings into liquid cash. So what we have done, and I will land on this, is to create an economy which is designed as if everybody in Ghana buys coffee on his way to work in the morning, when we actually eat fufu and wache in the morning. A coffee culture is different from the kind of culture that we have. If economics is not used to define behavior or to follow behavior, we are wasting our time, and the fundamentals have never, ever been tackled.
We thank you for that. But just before, okay, Doc, you want to make a contribution to that point?
Okay, so this nation's economy is essentially built on a structure that was designed by the British. It's a motley assortment of ethnic groups, violently yoked together by the British for the sole purpose of external exploitation. If you look at the numbers of our GDP, everything is raw materials. And if you see the amount of money that we get as Ghanaians from it, doesn't really make sense. The economy that was set up for us pre-independence is still what exists now. And with that sort of economy, you will always have a balance sheet recession, which is essentially a debt issue. So until we tackle the fundamental, as I say, and change that mindset of a colonial economy, we will have this boom and bust. We'll go to the IMF, we'll fix the problem, we'll come back, we will overspend because of our politics, get back into debt once again. So that is not the solution. The solution actually is for us to get back to the fundamentals and ask ourselves, what kind of a nation do we want? What kind of fundamentals do we want as an economy? Because at the moment, like you said, a traditional authority gets up and says, you have done very well for this Omai and that Omai and that Omai. We are talking of Ghana, not the Omai. And unless we begin to think as a people, as a people who stand for something together, then this thing will just keep happening and happening. It will just be a cycle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, David, maybe just before I come to Dr. Ndani. So, on one hand, there's a sense that our problems are not necessarily macro. If we understood the point you're making. At the same time, businessmen and women here are bedeviled by very macro-related consequences of inflation and so on and so forth, and exchange rate skyrocketing and so on. Please contextualize it for us. What do we do as businessmen in the light of the fact that you do not necessarily think our problems are necessarily macro?
No, I think there are times we look at things, and if we are looking at things from the wrong angle, then you come into that kind of paradox that you are. From a businessman, my problem is the macroeconomic indicators. That definitely is my problem. If the dollar is depreciating or is appreciating against the cedi, it's a problem for me. If inflation is skyrocketing, it's a problem for me. If I cannot borrow, it's a problem for me. But is macro the problem for the government? The answer is no. That is not the problem for the government. For example, we have increased. Your question, I answered it from a government point of view, a public sector point of view. This year alone, we've increased the policy rate 4 or 5 times. Inflation hasn't come down. Because as far as I'm concerned, our economy is not designed to address inflation where you are increasing monetary policy rate. In an economy where only 50,000 people have got mortgages, how do you address that with monetary policy increases? The average Ghanaian is not carrying a credit card. Even when they are using a credit, they have the credit card, they don't use it here. So we are not a borrowing economy. It's not a large part of people. So when you increase monetary policy rate, our reaction is different. Here, people pay for their houses. Do you understand? Yes. I know a former director general of a financial institution, big one, who actually said he was quote unquote broke and wanted to sell one of his houses, and the mother asked, because our minds doesn't let us. So when we treat the macroeconomic indicators that way, it is, I describe it this way, it is like using a Goldman Sachs strategy to solve a microfinance institution problem. That's what we are doing. So all I'm saying is that, yes, the chasing macroeconomic indicators creates the problems for the businesses. Now, let's change the mindset. Have you ever seen any president in this country who is actually making a conscious effort encouraging businesses to increase production? actually increase production. I don't know the last time you saw that. By visiting businesses and what can I do to let you increase production? What is GDP? GDP is simply the collection of our wealth together. That's all it is. But we know that in Ghana, our wealth includes the wealth which is exported, right? Nobody is ever measuring gross national product in this country. Have you ever heard, we talk about GDP growth. Have you ever heard anybody mention GNP here, which is actually the wealth which is created that stays here? We don't. There is something also we don't do. Nobody ever measures consumer sentiments here. A nation which doesn't measure consumer sentiments doesn't really know what it's about. What is consumer sentiments? It is how the people expect to spend. If you have an idea how the people expect to spend, if you can direct people into that area, because that's where spending is going. We don't measure that. So we measure GDP, we have nice indicators, everything stabilizes, but it stabilizes so that we can borrow more money. And I'm saying, don't restrict it to MPP. This is what we've been doing in cycles and cycles and cycles. We need to address those fundamental issues. Is that how we should manage our economy? My answer is no.
Okay. Dr. Ndani, I think you want to take off from the point David made. Okay.
Yes. I think I have some very strong points around or what is really happening to the economy. I want to take off from my brother's point. I think economies are designed, created, and developed. We design, create, and develop an economy. So we all had the Gettysburg economy. So most of the modern economies we have in the world, probably except China, were created by colonialists. So we had a colonial master here in the United Kingdom that actually crystallized a nation state, Ghana. The objective here was very, very clear. Was not to make Ghana their home base. They knew they had to give up this piece of land. And Britain for several years had been a seafaring nation, which created an economy out there based, and that was probably the first modern industrial center in the world. Very well, very deliberately created, feasting on raw materials around the world. So Mr. Gettysburg and his colleagues were here in the nation state Ghana to take away our gold, to take away our raw materials that were required for British factories in mainland UK and other places. They created a huge administration to look after it, security, and gave us basic stuff. That was the economy created by Gettysburg. And we happily, in independence, took over that economy. That's a colonial economy that was set up. Two types of colonial economies I want to draw your attention to. The great United States economy was created by colonialists. When they got to the current day America, Native Americans running around like all of us in Africa, and this were Renaissance people moving into a great new land, great opportunities. They deliberately created an economy. But that economy was different from the economy they created here. They wanted to make that place home. So think about the structure that was built into that US economy. The other one I want to draw a quick parallel to, hate it or love it, South Africa was occupied by colonialists, Dutch, English colonialists, who saw a beautiful piece of land. They were never given that land up. They created a brilliant economy. Till today, it's the #1 economy created, developed in Africa, and probably the world. So what we haven't done is when they handed this structure to us that we call an economy, it was loaded with a lot of wages for government workers. It was, and also, depending upon the economy you create a people to run that. So and very quickly, so that we understand the fundamentals. We have a saying in our language that when you fall, don't look at where you're lying, look where you tripped. So that's where we tripped. And if we need to make significant change, we have to go to where we are tripping. So as I said, Gettysburg, first of all, they gave us there are two types of education. I think it came up. There's a control education and creative education. Control education is what the British gave us. Lawyers, administrators, some medical staff, some security people, to do what? To keep the natives in check. They didn't give us creative education even to build our own, yes, some basic technical stuff, but thinkers that evolved machines and ways of doing things, not much. Until today, we still reward people with control education more than we reward people with creative education. And creative education is what moves a nation and an economy forward. That is still here with us. So we've done nothing about the Gettysburg economy and the infrastructure built to support that Gettysburg economy, including our educational system and our reward system, has not changed. You will probably pay a lawyer more than you pay. I sat on the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, where our best and brightest have been assembled. CSR, you need to have a minimum MPhil to get a place into CSR. I went and looked at a particular research institute. The entire budget for the year for that institute was 240,000 cedis. That is not, including salaries and money for research. That is not the salary of lawyer. So that's the kind of education that was created. We don't have an economy. We all, in our little ways, trying to survive. That's why you haven't seen a Ghanaian multinational. Now we have some brilliant guys who are into ICT and stuff, and maybe a brilliant lawyer who is taking his business across. But good luck. I think that we have to go back to basics and create an economy. And I tell you, if you go to South Africa, you have scientists, you have the first vaccine, and all those things that we are talking about is being created because they had creative education. And they reward creative education more than control education. If you go to the US, that's what happens. The other created economy, a designed, created, and evolving economy is the Chinese economy. In 1973, till today, part of the fight of China is that they don't want to be taken out of the privileges that less developed countries are getting. They were a less developed country, only 1973. They only got into the World Trade, WTO and all those places. Look what they have there. Because they designed, created, educated, and built an infrastructure to support an economy. So macroeconomics, indicators and all of that means nothing because we're all muddling around to succeed. I can tell you that.
Look, I don't want you to hand over the microphone yet. So just on the point you're making, Dr. Ndani, so I get the sense that until the fundamentals of the economy, i.e. the foundation and what is built on, changes dramatically, we will come back to the same problem, is what I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely. You see, when they say when the fundamentals are not right, the exchange rate will expose you. We all kind of giggle and laugh and think that it's a political statement. It's an economic truism today. It will always be tomorrow and forever. That the fundamentals of an economy, if you are an independent country as we call ourselves, Ghana, and your gross domestic consumption exceeds your gross domestic production aggregate, you're going to have to import that extra consumption. And that importing that extra consumption, whether it's food, whether it's telephone services, whether it's this light that is around us, you've got to get foreign exchange to do that. And the more of that you consume, the more foreign exchange you require, and you don't have it. And therefore, the exchange rate will expose you. So let us fundamentally understand that we consume. And also, if you go back to the Gettysburg economy, they handed over motorcades, they handed over police, they handed over every minister. Anyway, we can get into that. But all I'm saying is that that whole economy was meant to serve a colonial mindset, supported by the colonial. Look at even the kind of houses we built for our people in government. You saw Pelosi's house attacked, the husband was attacked. Did you see? It was in a very ordinary community. It's in a very ordinary community. Just try to enter a DC's house in Ghana. And you see how many police guns will be pointed at you. There's a Speaker of the U.S. Congress, the third in rank, living in a very modest place because they're there serving the people. But here, the people are serving our leaders. But that's political. So let's not get there. Let's just avert our minds to economy, economic structures, infrastructure, including education that is built to support economy. And I feel pained because I've traversed this. I've traversed, the Ghanaian setup that we call economy. I've traversed global economic markets where you actually go and see a deliberately designed, created, and developed economy. That in the aggregate, by the time the budget is read and you hear the budget, the various actors, you can predict the way they respond. And when you can predict the way they respond, the macroeconomic indicators become relevant. And therefore, for a businessman, the prediction of various economic agents to stimuli that are coming out in a budget statement, global or domestic, is important to you. How many Ghanaian businessmen care about the budget in Nigeria, or Togo, or Benin, or Cote d'Ivoire? We can't even think about it because we are not responsive. Even when they read the budget, maybe those days what we used to be concerned about was the price of petroleum products. Till today. So I think that for Stanford Seed and everybody involved, let's go back and be deliberate in creating or designing, creating, and developing an economy. The Gaggisberg economy has not changed. Our financial services are held by foreign agents. Our mining is held by foreign agents. Tell me what is not held by foreign agents. Telephones are held by foreign agents. Nothing. So if you take your total GDP and assign the GDP to local agents versus foreign agents, great. That wealth is produced in this country. That's what the economists will say, right? But if you were distributing that wealth, how much of it sits with us? Salaries, wages and salaries, most of the time.
Right.
Otherwise, the capital and equipment and thinking is all paid abroad. So
I'll take a supplement. Thank you, Doc. I will take a supplementary point on this from David, and then I'll come to Nanama to start a new line of question, which is essentially, what does the outlook seem like? So, for example, we know we're going through crisis right now. How long are we going to be here? As business people, we want to understand how long we're going to be here for planning purposes before we even start looking at opportunities. And David, before you go, and after the supplementary point, we'll come back to you to tell us about those areas that we can dominate. I'm getting a lot of feedback from people who want to hear more on that. Anyway, your supplementary point.
I just wanted to draw attention to something Dr. Andani said and emphasize it. And this mindset is such a serious thing we underrate. He talked about the fundamentals, right? Now, everybody knows the problem with the fundamentals. We import too much. It's basic. We import toothpick, everything. And everybody is carrying cash, going to China. We know all the problems. But when we say the fundamentals are weak, the mindset of the people are so divisive that they assume that once you remove the person there, the who, and replace it with a new person, the fundamentals will change. So when you look at the budget, you don't see, have we, quote and unquote, banned some imports? Have we made some adverts to encourage more local production? Are we telling government institutions to ensure that everything they are buying is as much as possible made in Ghana? What effort are we doing to reduce the demand for the dollar? That is not there. So we posit the solution in the who. And we think that the fundamentals change with the who. The fundamentals keep repeating. And also that is why we never measure gross national product. Because so far as we have GDP counted, we can borrow money. But once you start measuring GNP, you will realize that the economy will look very, very weak. And those are the fundamentals.
But David, let me pick up on that again, just for the avoidance of doubt. I know I'm cognizant of the time and the number is question that I'm coming to. But David, so this point about Ghana being a consumer market, there isn't a lot of manufacturing and so on. I get concerned when I hear these examples being given. I want you to be able to draw parallels between Ghana and Rwanda today. And in my readings, Rwanda's economy is not strikingly different from Ghana's, even though it has managed to traverse, if you like, the very typical consumer positioning of Ghana's economy today. Question is, what is fundamentally different between Ghana and Rwanda, knowing that both are not necessarily manufacturing at scale?
Our psyche. And I will never stop emphasizing our psyche. I gave you the example of polythene bags and the Santini example. Go to Rwanda today. It doesn't matter who you are. The same chief cannot carry polythene into Rwanda, but they can. And please, I'm not saying it as a fact.
Yeah, right.
But in Rwanda, if you disobey the law, you will be jailed. It doesn't matter who. Do you understand? In Ghana, it matters who. It matters who you are related to, which stool you occupy, which party you support. All those things are factors. So Rwanda has been able to maintain the clean city. I've had the privilege, and I call it a privilege, of having seen Lin Kuan Yew in person, sat in a room and be allowed to ask questions, right? And when Lin Kuan Yew tells you how Singapore became the so-called cleanest city, he told, and this is not in his book, this is sitting live in front of him. He said the human mind makes a decision or his perception in the first 20 seconds. And when he decided that Singapore would become the cleanest city in the world, he only cleaned the airport. He cleaned the airport so much that when you got to the airport, you had a perception that Singapore was clean and that the rest of the city was actually dirty. But once you formed that impression at the airport, that impression stayed with you before they started cleaning the rest of Singapore. Do you understand? It meant banning chewing gum. It meant jailing people who chewed gum. It didn't mean excusing chiefs. I mean, how can a country allow galamsey and the people who do the galamsey are in prominent positions? And we go to IMF borrowing $3 billion. When the records show that through galamsey, $8 billion worth of gold were exported. I mean, does it make sense to you? So if we cannot sanction those who are doing the galamsey because the chief is giving the land out, the fundamentals have not been started. You cannot compare it to Rwanda.
Right.
It's as basic. It has everything to do with psyche. It has nothing to do with macroeconomic indicators. Let me land on this. You see, when somebody comes to this room and measures our GDP, he is measuring the collection of all our wealth. Macroeconomic indicators is actually a reflection of how much the people are producing. But when we tackle macroeconomic indicators, we have reversed the problem. We are not tackling how much the people are producing, how much money is remaining here. We are tackling whether we can have certain indices which makes us look good and become the fastest growing nation in the world. Do you understand what I mean? Right. That's very important. So we've done everything upside down.
Right. Nanama, you advise multinationals, and a lot of us business people come to your firm typically for questions around outlook. What should we do to position ourselves and so on? Before we get to the opportunities, we want to pick from you, what does it seem like? Are we going to be here for a while longer? Before I ask you other questions about which opportunities there will be and so on, how long are we going to be here in this general malaise in the economy?
Wow. Okay. Wow, it's really loud. Thank you for that very difficult question. I wish I had a crystal ball, which I don't. Yeah, David, maybe I can borrow your crystal ball. Look, I think anybody who professes to know how long, the crisis is going to continue, you should be a little bit cautious around. I'm also not an economist, so what I can say, I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what David and Dr. Andani were saying about what the problem is, and I think that will bring me to my answer about the outlook. I think the difference between Ghana and Rwanda and Ghana and other countries that have succeeded is leadership, the quality of the leadership. And, as David said, this is a bipartisan issue. It's not an NDC or an MPP issue. It's not an executive versus a legislative issue. And I would even go as far as saying that we are all complicit. So far as we have a democratic system of government, and to date, the democracy is working, and we can argue about how well it's working. So far as we have that, we have the right to effect change. We have the right to effect change. So we have this broken system, we have this mindset. We are all part of the problem. We're all part of the problem. We elect and we support the leadership. We are complicit in the creation of the system. I know it's not what we all want to hear. Everybody's looking at me with a very straight face. But until we accept that we are all part of the problem, we can't even begin to formulate a solution. So I think the problem is leadership. And we all have to be held accountable, and we all have to behave in the way that we want everybody else to behave. So how long is it going to take us to come out of this crisis? How long is it going to take us to actually change our ways, our attitudes, our mindset, as David said? That's how long it's going to take us to get out of the fundamental problem and to design and create the sort of economy that Dr. Andani is talking about. But just to bring it, down to brass tacks, because I'm a small business owner myself. And yes, and probably like a lot of you, I've been spending a lot of time planning and planning contingency plans upon contingency plans. So, look, I think that this is not a revelation, right? So I think we're all waiting to see when we are going to get an IMF program and to understand what the IMF program will mean, the impact that that will have for the business environment. I've read, as I'm sure you have, various predictions about when we expect to get the program and what sorts of things we can expect. And I've also read, statistics about the medium-term projections about growth and that kind of thing. So I am cautiously optimistic. I see some predictions, forecasts that growth in 2023 will be low, will be depressed. Yeah. But beyond that, what I'm reading, according to the experts, we are hoping to see an improvement in GDP, though David doesn't think we should. David doesn't think we should pay any mind to GDP. I also, in preparing for this, I also did some reading around what we can expect from consumers and what we can expect around the improvement in purchasing power and consumption. And so from what I've read, I think we can expect consumption, in spite of the fact that inflation is projected to be still high in 2023, the projection is that consumption is going to increase modestly and double. It's from a low base anyway. So I think the signs are, and it's obviously dependent on this IMF deal, as I said, but I think if you look at some of the indications, there are some signs of hope. And it depends also on where you look in the economy. So I think it's very easy in this current climate to just sort of have a pessimistic view across the board. And I don't think that makes sense. It's not warranted. So if you look at a sector of the economy, such as the tech sector, there's a lot of optimism, and growth in the tech sector is projected at 15% in 2023. So how long is this crisis supposed to last? A, it depends on where you sit, and B, it depends on leadership. Yes.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ndani, I'm coming. I know David will have to run. So, okay, let me run to David. I'll come back to you. Doc, I'm going to come back to you and ask you about what the best case scenario will look like. Again, before we jump into opportunities, knowing that the fundamentals must change, etc. And with that as a backdrop, what will the best case scenario look like? And then, Dr. Edu Sarkodie, I'll be coming to you to ask you about resilience. I want to understand from your perspective, how do we build resilience? And for David, just because you might have to leave, David has a hard stop at 12, thereabouts, so he might have to leave. So we'll try and wrap it up. But David, so what are the areas that we can dominate? Of course, in addition to anything else that you have to say.
Okay, I think in my presentation, I talked about some of the areas which are already growing. But in any economy, crisis or no crisis, I am a pro-dominant thinker than a competition thinker. Because I think the theory of economic competition is dead. Competition simply means that you compete until you get to equilibrium. And by the way, I have a background in economics, so I just want you to understand that. In equilibrium, we are essentially zero in growth. We are all competing, and everybody is supposed to understand the market, etc. I think dominant companies, ethical as well, take the likes of Facebook or Meta, take the likes of Apple, who have created dominance. They've not created it out of the so-called perfect competition. So that's one point. But I think before I go, it's important I just make a couple of points, and starting from where Nanama left off. You asked the question as to how long we are going to be in this. The government has said that IMF program, hopefully by the end of December. I would like to take their word for that. But as a businessman, and as somebody who advises businesses, I will always have an if scenario. What if there is no IMF program? I don't hear anybody talk about that danger. It's also possible that we may not have an IMF program. I mean, and why do I say that? I say that because we didn't sign the debt suspension, what do you call it, agreement before it's lapsed. So now we are focused more on debt restructuring, how we sustain our debt, right? The president has assured there is no haircut, and his minister for information, if the report is right, says the haircut will not be on principal, it may be on, even if it happens on interest, I believe it may affect the financial, or some financial institutions a bit more. So my own view is that we may stabilize sometime around June, if we actually do get a program by December. But I will plan for businesses to look at, I would recommend for businesses to look at two things. One, in the unlikely event there is no program, because that's what happened to Zambia. The program dragged for like 3 more years, when everybody was expecting a program, and they were in a similar situation like us. Two, even if there is a program, but it's not the type of program that impact on businesses, but only restore the macroeconomic indicators. So businesses should look at that. Having said that, the bigger question we should be asking is, when are we ever going to get out of this cycle? Because I don't think this cycle is limited to this government. I have a paper I'm doing, it's taking forever. It's called 2027, The Danger Ahead and How to Avert It. It deals with, by the time Ghana is 70, the fundamentals we haven't built and how disastrous the economy will look like by 2027. In fact, fear 2027 more than 2022 and 2023. I can tell you that. I look into the crystal ball. If there's a year you must fear, it is 2027, right? Because we will borrow our way into poverty by 2027, unless we change something fundamental. Having said that, is there doom? No. Societies transform in 3 ways. Ghana and Africa will transform in a 4th way. The first way societies transform is leadership, the one we call leadership, the likes of Kagame, Lee Kuan Yew, China, etc. And people talk about China, and They don't even study what's happening in China. The CPC, the Communist Party, has just finished their conference. They have decided to emphasize domestic growth as a basis for their growth. And I see African leaders are not watching it. They are rather watching the fact that China says zero COVID. Listen to the news very well. The zero COVID is true. There are challenges to it. But it is designed by Western media to let you think the way they think. And people follow Western media, and at times they make Western problems our problems. I would rather copy how China is growing its domestic market than follow the criticism of China. It doesn't mean China is good. It means there is something I can copy there. And the good things are like liberal democracy or civil liberties are copied from the West. Anyway, first one is leadership, strong leadership. We haven't got it. And when I say strong leadership, it doesn't mean the leadership is not strong. But the way China, Singapore, Rwanda have been able to pull their people out and make sure that what they want to do is done, it will be difficult to do because we like democracy. Ghana, the way we eat democracy, we even believe it has to be expensive. Singapore spends only $2.5 million on their elections. $2.5 million. We spend $200 million on electoral commission alone. And we think it is justified for democracy to be expensive. I mean, if you have that kind of psyche, you are not getting out of the problem through leadership. So that's gone. And we are not going to get it now, nor tomorrow. A second way societies will get out of this problem is a critical mass of elite who come together and push the front. That happened in America. Unfortunately, we are not going to get it here. Why? Because the elite, and Dr. Ndani said it, each of the elite is trying to get out of the problem. All that we want to do is to become rich, align ourselves to one political party, get rich, so that we are outside the problem. So we won't get a critical mass of elite. The third way societies get out of this problem is mass revolt. The likes of the long China March. Those kind of mass revolt, we are also not going to get it here. Well, what about Arab Spring? I'm talking about Ghana. Arab Spring did not end up in that massive change. China's example of a mass revolt is the kind of thing that I'm talking about from 1949, to now. And they plan 100-year cycles, by the way. So that mass revolt, even if it happens here, don't forget, we had Kubi Preko here. We've come back to square one. So a mass revolt will not result in that because the masses themselves are so poor and so divided that they will follow either as a result of tribe or when they are bribed, they will be divided among the political parties. But there is hope. That hope is a fourth strategy that people don't talk about. It's what I call convergence of unintended consequences. There are so many things happening that will converge, unintended. A lot of people are entrepreneurs here. AFCFT is an example. Digitization is an example. People are jumping the normal ways that America developed. Telephone links, in terms of connecting through wire, is no more relevant because everybody is mobile. Digitization. A lot of things are happening that are not intended to create a convergence, but it will happen. What I recommend to businessmen, especially the likes of Stanford Seed and their listeners, is that the less attention you pay to politicians, the faster we will develop. Many people think that we will develop by going into politics. Look, politics is the fastest way to disappoint your followers. The less you pay attention to politics, and by politics I mean the political divide, and focus on the core, and be able to tell them as it is. I'm happy that this didn't start with a politician coming to open it. I go to events like this, they call a politician to open it, they clap for him, and after he goes, they insult the politicians for the rest of the day. Why did you invite him to come and open it? The less attention we pay to them, the less relevant they will become. And the day will come, then they will realize in their irrelevance that we are moving on. Businesses should continue doing the best they can do, and that way we will converge in the unintended consequences, and in their irrelevance, they will start doing the right things. That's my view.
Wow. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very, very much. Dr. Edusakode, I come back to you. I come to you now. We want to talk about, thank you very much. Please, an applause for David. He takes leave of us. Thank you so very much, David.
I still want to say a word about this Georgesburg economy because
Right, please
it
go
really
ahead.
does form the fundamental of the challenge that we have. It is not just Georgesburg economy, it's a Georgesburg legal system, it's a Georgesburg land system, it's a Georgesburg traditional system. The whole thing does not work. And the various parts do not link together. I'll give you a very simple example. If you lend money in this country, after it goes bad, it takes you maybe 3, 4, 5 years to get a judgment of the court. And yet, the Banking Supervision Division have another way of assessing whether or not you will get the money or not. How does that? It doesn't work.
There's a
And so,
disconnect.
yeah, there's a disconnect between the entire structure of the spectrum. And so, for me, until we work on that, so when you ask a question, when will this crisis end? If you mean the crisis is the temporal one that we are in, that is a cycle. It will end. But if you mean the fundamental crisis where we don't even have an economy, what we have, as I said, is what the British put together basically to exploit the land. And until we change that, nothing will happen. We will go through this boom and bust, which we call a crisis. It is just a symptom of the crisis. The real crisis is a fundamental, which is that this economy, one, is over-liberalized. There is no economy where everybody comes in to be able to do everything that he wants. Now, we talked about China. I was in China. I was in Tsinghua University. The Chinese do not allow you to do certain things. One, to enter into some parts of the Chinese banking sector, it's almost impossible because they will not allow you to bring your stated capital, come and raise money from their citizens and use it the way you want to use it. Never happens in China. But here, we have a liberalized system. So what do? You raise your capital, you bring it, raise as much money as you can from the general public, and use it perhaps in federals of the companies that are here that will further your home interests business. That should not happen. So until we deal with these fundamentals, we'll always have these challenges on our hands. Now to my question. You talked about resilience. I will just give you my examples. The first thing is you need a lot of data, a lot of research, because you have to make a very informed decision as to what has happened. And research in Ghana is very hard to get. Most often, it's dated. It's a year old, but you have to work your way out and make some estimations. A lot of data. You need the right people around you. The right people around you. And because, again, I'll go back to the legal environment. It's just so difficult to work your way through it. But if you have a lot of information and the right people around you, well, I think you have a better chance of holding on with resilience than if you don't have that information. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Do we have questions here yet before I move to Dr. Andani? Other questions, especially on the back of what Dr. Edusa Akodie just said? If not, we'll come back to Dr. Andani. Doc, I was asking for the outlook again. In your opinion, what's the best case scenario in the light of all that is happening, all that you have described? Again, I'm asking because we want to be able to position ourselves better as business people going into the future.
Thank you very much. Last time I met the chief executive of Stanbic Bank, he told me you chose the right time to retire. So life is not going to be any easy. But I always say that I leave the macro for the government to manage. I manage the micro. All of your businesses, you manage the micro. So let's narrow down what the macro variables mean so that within your space, you can manage your micro economy. So let's not get too carried away with macro indicators. Yes, for example, if your business is import dependent and your pricing to the market is totally inelastic, then you probably want to preserve capital by putting it in some, at least, capital hedge. so that when things are more predictable and your clients will accept your price, then you can, kick up again. So, we have all these, just preserve capital. If your market is very elastic like fuel, this yesterday, 3 days ago, I bought fuel at $16.99. When I was returning on my trip, it was $18.50. This morning, my driver just told me it's 23 something. That's absolutely almost, and the streets are still full of cars. So if you are in that kind of market, really, pick up the price, the best exchange rate you can get it, and reprice. As for inflation and all of that, it's an aggregate thing. At your firm level, what's your inflation hedge? Is it price? And I saw something called shrinkflation, so that you can also find a very clever way without changing the fiscal look of your products and services to just reduce the total cost that goes into it, and then you can. So there are all sorts of ways we can get into. But my reminder is just to say, at business levels, even at the bank level, yes, we are conscious of the macros, but we manage within our micro. What's my client base? Input client base, output client base, my service providers, my staff. How do I keep them within this irrational market circumstances to survive? So let's not get, as for the Gaggisberg economy, creating, designing, and evolving an economy, it's a total leadership and mindset thing that we need to deal with. That will take a lot of time. But you have businesses, when you live here, you want to go and run. So let's, within the macro, think about our micro environment and the markets and adapt to it. And it's not impossible. It's really not impossible. But just very quickly on time to get out of this. We're in an irrational market. And for me, I've been thinking about what are the causes of the irrationality. It's a physical indiscipline. So we go to an IMF with an expenditure income mismatch. For the 19, 20 times we've gone to the IMF, it's an income expenditure mismatch where we've said our expenditure exceeds our income and give us the delta and we will become good. And so we always promise to increase income. We've never opened a Pandora's box called expenditure. If I had any opinion today, I would say, let's open that expenditure Pandora's box and find out that the 3.5 to 4 million people employed out of this 36 million people, they alone consume nearly 60% of our total tax revenue. That's totally unfair. There are certain good to have social programs that we are all running with. If things are good, let's do it. If things are not good, let's shelve it. I believe our external partners are waiting to hear us open that conversation around our expenditure and pull them out. And I think that you'll begin to see some symbol, because most of what we call crisis today, I like crisis. In fact, for most of the organizations I have run, sometimes you deliberately create crisis to bring about change. This is good crisis. And in military parlance, they say never waste a good crisis. So this is a time for us to fundamentally change the structure of the economy. I think that, households, firms like yourself will find space because certain businesses will go out of business. Look, when crises come, there are winners and losers. And I believe that in the next 2 to 3 years, we can get out of this. The mindset will be forced on us. We will. But, again, when we talk leadership, normally people reduce it to people. I don't think leadership is people. Leadership is a community, a business, deciding upfront what good looks like. If you decide what good looks like in all the parameters that you run, then that credence, that kind of credible structure produces leaders who run with that. And therefore, you have very little room as a leader. You can only push it as fast as it. Sometimes in Ghana and Africa, we tend to think leadership is the individual. We're having a leak on you moment in Rwanda. We're having, what's the Chinese president's name? Because they've all agreed what good looks like. So Paul Kagame cannot get away with. I mean, he can get away with it because we just had a Holocaust. And therefore, anything that he puts in to take people back to development, the world will tolerate him. Some of his measures, if he wanted to do it here, and we had ears open to all the international media, we couldn't do it. If you want to repeat what Mahathir did in Malaysia, you may run into trouble. But again, it's about us designing, creating, and developing an economy with everybody on board, with a credible framework of what we call an acceptable leadership framework that would enable us pick the kind of leaders who can run that framework. But if you pick leaders without any framework, then everything goes. If it comes, what he can do, he can do. If what he cannot do, tough. So but I think that in 2-3 years, we will get out of this.
Thank you. We'll take a supplementary point from Dr. Edisa.
See, the challenge is we don't make a distinction between economic policy and economic policy management. When you make an economic policy, it has implications. And those implications has to be managed if you want to get to the desired results. For example, and I'm just thinking of the cuff, we are contracting the economy, essentially, by raising interest rates. If you contract the economy, it has implications. Must we still come to work 5 times a day? Because fuel is up. Perhaps we can come 4 times and work till 6 or 7 and still make up for the number of hours, if that will work. Who is calculating that to ensure that we manage the contraction of the economy and the persistent increase in fuel? We are not. We're just letting the thing flow as it is. Perhaps there may be other means of managing this whole thing. And the way to get out is to plan the economic policy management in such a way that we achieve the desired result. For now, I'm not seeing it. I think we've just left it to, we have the economic policy. Its management, I am not seeing it at all. And that's the challenge.
Right. Nanama, I jump to you and I probably will stay with you for the next, few minutes, and because I know you also have a time you may have to take leave of us. But there is a major problem with digital skills today. I run a fintech, and every day I get concerned about the number of engineers, or if you like, programmers, developers, who are getting jobs from America and from different parts of the world. Either they are totally moving their families to these regions, or they are sitting here in Ghana in their rooms and they are getting jobs and they're being paid $5,000 a month, which is practically impossible. Now, this problem is exacerbated by the fact that the exchange rate conversation for fintechs in this room or technology companies in this room who have to host their applications on servers which are far away in Ireland or in the US and so on, now are unable to operate profitably because essentially they are changing, CDs for very few dollars to be able to pay for servers and so on in the US and the UK. How do we as technology people or companies here adopting technology deal with that skills shortage in the light of the fact that we cannot be competitive and pay the kinds of salaries that would entice the quality skills in this technology sphere to remain in the country and to work for us? Quite a mouthful.
That's a real dilemma. That's a real dilemma. The broader issue affects everybody, which is the brain drain. I think I'm genuinely stumped. I think we can talk about some strategies that you can employ to manage the brain drain. But fundamentally, it's extremely difficult to compete. And the best and the brightest will go where they can command the highest return for the investment they made in education and really what they're worth. So I think one of the things that one could seek to do is to bring these people into an equity position. Give them a stake, give them some skin in the game, in the hopes that they're going to take a longer term view. But I mean, really, if you put yourself in their shoes, you will go. And I think it's a question of managing the timing and trying to train up people as quickly as possible, sort of managing with assistance from, we can also import services, right? In order to try and help us to develop the talent that we still have left. But it's a tough one. I don't have any wonderful solutions to that, unfortunately.
You're essentially referring to creating ESOPs, so schemes that technology companies can build up to allow for engineers and such skilled staff to own stake in the business. So if they have a skin in the game, then they get to stay, is what you're saying.
I think we can hope that they will stay. But in such an environment, I mean, cash is king. And so the dollars that you can get in your pocket today, I think people will put a premium on that over, the long-term growth in a business. So I think it requires, generally, I think managing in this environment requires flexibility and requires, thinking creatively about how to resolve the issue. So you can do a mix of things. I mean, if you can't afford all of their time, perhaps you can afford some of their time. So rather than, part with them, offer part-time solutions, offer ownership stakes. I mean, you have to, I think, depending on your situation and what is possible and what sort of offer you can put together that's attractive, you have to probably pivot and do a variety of things to hold on. But this particular, tech industry losing talent is a really difficult one.
Okay. Doc, I think you have a point on that.
So I have a practical example. We needed some software to run our insurance companies. And we did an analysis with what was coming from Pakistan and India. And we had 2 young boys in-house with a lady, and they said they will be able to build, of course, with a lot of trepidation from the management. But after a while, these 2 gentlemen and a boy built a fantastic software which is working now. We've sold to some companies in Ghana, sold some to Nigeria, and some to Cote d'Ivoire. But we lost 2 of them. One went to Kenya, and then subsequently, then the other one went to the United States. So we had to give shares to the one who is left so that he becomes a partner. And he has stayed, and now the other one who is in the United States is saying, well, if you make me a shareholder too, then I will come and be part of it. So I think, let's face it, these young men are looking for a skin in the game. They not just want to be workers. They want to own part of it. And I think that as managers, we need to have a flexible approach towards, especially the fintech companies, and allow them to have a stake in it and then run it the way they want to run it with guidance from us. Yeah.
I think that's a very important point. And for me, one of the lowest hanging fruits for us as a country to leapfrog is to harness our talent in that space. And I say this because I, just to give an example, in my previous seat, some 2 gentlemen came to demonstrate an app. Fantastic. I was totally blown. The next time, and I was waiting for them to come back. We had made an appointment. I wasn't hearing, and I called the guy, and somehow they had met a Chinese businessman who offered them $250,000 to resettle them into China. I needed to do everything in my power to stop them. And I said, look, if you get into China, it's a very big place. This idea will go anywhere in the world, but you'll be lost in China. So you stay here. But I just didn't use words. We made sure that they had the resources. And I'm happy to say that it's a thriving company now. It's a thriving company. So, and I think that in certain instances where we have had conversations with government, we've said, can you put some venture capital with very good technology people to vet some of these ideas, and let's begin to create our own Silicon Valley. Because, and I give another example, during COVID, Stanbic was probably one of the first organizations to roll out working at home with 85% of our staff. In fact, today, if Stanbic wants to close down their branches and run it very well, 90% of the staff will work from home. That technology was developed by just our people sitting in our technology department, no external help. And we exported that technology to the rest of the group. So can you imagine if they had patented it, and our cost, the cost of operations, is probably gone down by nearly 35%. So I remember telling the head of HR, look, this technology thing, sooner or later, will be managing work and not workers. You get it? You manage work and not workers. Because you want work done, the worker could be anywhere, either in Papua New Guinea or sitting at Kokomlemle, and log into your system and get the job done. So let's begin to think about it. So I think, for me, your area is one of the very, very low-hanging, high-yielding, and we need to demonstrate that you don't need to go to the US. If you go, your idea will just be taken off you. They are more innovative, they've got more resources to scale, and sooner or later you'll be out of the game. So I think businesses should sponsor young people with technology, and I can tell you that Stanbic has done quite a bit in that space. And I also know some other angel investors who have done that. But we need more structured, probably government. This is not much. $10 million, these guys don't need that much. $50,000, $20,000, $100,000, that's all they need to set up. And they've got brains. So low-hanging fruits, and I think if it's a recommendation for Stanford seed, just because of your name, Stanford, maybe people will take it more seriously.
Wow, but that's a soundbite. So we manage work and not workers. That's really profound. Nanama, you have a supplementary point on this.
Yeah, I was going to say that actually there is funding, maybe getting a little bit more granular. There's funding for tech companies. And so I guess if you, making it a little bit practical, if you found yourself in that situation, potentially you can access funding to help you to hold on to these workers.
That's exciting. I want to stay there a little bit longer. So how do companies here, technology companies here, find funding in the contemporary economic situation we are in? Are we attractive enough to be able to attract the right type of funding as technology companies in these markets?
I think clearly there's a resounding yes. I think this year, up through Q3, there was about $4 billion worth of investments in tech companies in Africa. And as I mentioned earlier, Ghana is a particularly attractive market from the point of view of investments in tech. And by the end of 2022, I think investments in the tech sector is projected to be around $7 billion in Africa. So there is money awash in the system. And so it's a question of, what is it that you're offering and where are you looking? There's a variety of funding. There's a lot of grant funding, interestingly. There's a lot of development finance institutions that are offering significant amounts of grant funding. We came across a facility by KFW recently. I think it was posted on the Ghana Venture Capital Association platform. There is a facility that is offering up to 25% of grant funding for the cost of the project. So, and there's $1 million limit for the project. So let's say you have a project that's $4 million, you can get up to $1 million in grant funding under this facility. So there's a lot of grant funding from a variety of different sources. And I think in this environment, people should really focus on looking for grant funding. There is a lot of it. Make sure you look for grant funding before you go and look for your equity funding and then the debt funding. There is also a lot of private equity money focused on Africa that has been raised. And these people have to invest in African businesses. And some of them are tech-focused. So I think the tech sector is, as Dr. Andani and Dr. Sarkodie said, is an area that is really exciting. And Ghana in particular, as I mentioned earlier, the tech sector in Africa is projected to grow at 10% next year. And in Ghana, it's projected to grow at 15%. So one would expect that that sort of growth forecast would attract a disproportionate amount of the funding that's out there. In my practice, we have worked with a variety of companies. There are so many. I think what's so exciting about tech, particularly in a time of challenge, is the tech applications that are being used to solve a myriad of problems is just breathtaking. So we had the privilege of working with an investor who invested in Farmerline. And for those of you who may not have heard of Farmerline, Farmerline is an ag tech company, and they essentially have helped to make farmers and people in the primary agricultural sector access different parts of the supply chain directly, so cutting out the middleman. And from the other side, helping people who are looking for sustainable commodities use the platform to find that. But there are all sorts of applications. I've read in preparing for this presentation about a Nigerian tech business that is helping to aggregate and to do bulk purchases of food and different essential items. That kind of thing in this environment, I think David was talking about the providing food for the urban dweller and food prices being particularly expensive. That sort of application of tech, I think, would be really, really useful in this sort of environment. So in answer to your question, there's a variety of sources of funding. There's a lot of grant funding. There's a lot of PE funding that's been raised. And finally, there is debt funding as well. There are debt funds. There are debt private equity funds. And then there are, I guess, some of the banks also are looking to finance growth opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, Doc. Yes.
The only point I'd like to make about tech financing is ethical equity financing. Oh, and also capital. It's now the new gold. And just as we have gold buried down there, we don't have the technology and the skills to remove. So do we have brains that can produce high tech, but we just don't have the organization and infrastructure to support it. So I see some equity proposals to tech companies that literally in a short space of time makes those brains people irrelevant. And this is what makes the tech company is the brains. So let's ensure that the capital doesn't get too greedy. I've seen a few of those companies fizzle out very quickly. The guy was supposed to be funding young people to grow, and before they realized they were employees. And this new generation, especially the tech people, just don't have the chemistry of being employees. So whether it's grant funding, whether it's equity funding, has to be basically ethical. And that is why I think government must step forward and let's put out some ethical structures to ensure that our brains are not taken away as our gold is being taken away, because very easy. These boys have never seen a car before, but the kind of things they do will sell for billions. So let's protect them. So ethical grants, ethical equity, ethical stuff to ensure, but ensure that the continuity of that business is the brains. If they take it away because you have capital, you have a shell of a company, and you say, oh, it's not good, you just didn't have the right formula.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think the one thing that I would like to leave you all with is, in this environment, it's super important that you are talking to legal advisors because you need the protection. And whereas before maybe you could wing it and maybe fix it in the wash, now as you are planning, be talking to your advisors. And particularly, it's very important to talk to scrupulous legal advisors for some of these young tech entrepreneurs. And even for very experienced business people, we see situations all the time where people enter into these agreements that look fine, or you're particularly optimistic when you're entering into them, and you don't have downside protection. I've seen one recently entered into by very sophisticated, the most sophisticated business people in this country. Very complicated structure. And one or two things have changed in the environment, and the potential fallout from that is them losing their business. And this is one of the largest businesses in the country. So very, very important. I know it sounds self-serving because I'm a lawyer, but it is particularly important now to make sure that your contracts work even when one or two assumptions go awry.
Thank you. So I think we'll just take the last round of questions and then we will go to the audience. There are a number of questions here that I would ask before our time is up. And every company here has a certain corporate social responsibility. And one of the biggest concerns I have had over the last couple of months is about the spillover effects of the present circumstances and the possible social unrests and potential security implications for the big ticket stuff happening in the ecosystem and the cost of fuel. And when I read on social media the agitations and the young people complaining, it gives me cause for worry. What are your thoughts? How do we protect the most vulnerable in society to survive the crisis as business people in this room? What do we do? Any of you ready with an answer could please help us.
Room. But yeah, it's a very, very important matter, and I'm not sure business people are equipped to do that. I know that I did some work with the SDGs, chairing the Presidential Council for Corporate Participation in SDGs. And not that we foresaw this coming, but we said we needed an SDG delivery fund, and to which companies in Ghana will pay a certain percentage of their corporate social responsibility budgets into a pool, and we manage it ourselves depending upon where the pressure points are. So for example, if, as you're saying now, there's this kind of pressure, and we had that fund. It's been set up. The lawyers were still sorting out how we'll govern it, because we also wanted to make sure that private sector were contributing to it and had control, even though it's still a government SDG fund. So if that was significant, that could start to run certain social interventions, but we don't have that yet. And I don't know how private companies are equipped to do that. And that's why I'm saying now we needed a politician, and there are several things in the tax structure. Again, you have, you move left and your mother dies, you move right and your father dies. Because if we unpack the petroleum taxes, then we already, in order to drop the price, we are going to impact revenue which is already not adequate. So we are between a rock and a very hard place. And I think that governmental action, and also not just governmental, our friends, the development community, we should probably speak to them quickly.
At the last National Social Security Conference for the world, which was held recently, they came up with a communique. And among the things was that when we define you as an elderly without an income, they felt that the Social Security institution should pay you some minimum to enable you survive, to prevent the elderly from being destitute. To which, for example, if you take a company like an institution like the Trust, SNIT, government would have to make some arrangements set that people who are above a certain age, what we call aged, and without an income would have something to live on, because they did realize that when times like this happen, those very vulnerable, like the aged, are the first ones who suffer. And of course, then the children, and then the women, and then the young men. So the idea was for some, again, economic policy management to be put in place to ensure that we don't get these elderly people on the streets and destitute and all that, which then tends to create all the social unrest that we're talking about. But over here, it's a big challenge because, first of all, we are not even collecting enough as a trust. And so if you load this on the trust, then it's a problem. So as Dr. Andani said, we will need some government intervention. I mean, we've done it before. In the days we did PAMSCAT, and that was an attempt to manage a structural adjustment program. Now we have, I don't know what we will call this program, Structural Adjustment Pro 2, whatever we will choose to call it. So we'll have to come up with these social programs. And the thing about these social programs is that when you say social, people think, are you a socialist? No, because actually the means of production are capitalist. But when you underline all these so-called capitalist community, are very socialist way of distributing the wealth. And I think that we ought to take a very critical look at how we do these things in Ghana. Yes, the means of production should be capitalist, but when we have situations like this, we ought to find a way of cushioning everybody so that we don't have destitutes in our society. And one way to look at it is to use the social security system to handle it.
Yeah, in addition to all of that, I would say that as business people and business leaders, we need to use our voice. There's a lot of engagement happening right now about what government should do. We really need to emphasize the need for government to pay attention to clear security concerns. All these young, energetic men at the various traffic lights with very little hope and very little to lose. All the Okada riders, there are large swathes of young men particularly who I think can be very easily mobilized to create a problem. We can see them, and I think we ought to, in our leadership roles, be vocal, be talking to civil society, and be making noise so that we focus the minds of our politicians on some of these things. And as Dr. Andani said, we need to also engage with the donor community and look at what can be done. And where we have the firepower, we should add our voice and add funds.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I think we'll come to the questions from the audience. I have a set of questions here. While we get ready for the questions from the audience, I would ask some of them. What I have here is from Mr. Intim, who is asking, what would it take for Ghana to implement and spur on its industrial revolution? A revolution to generate jobs, revenue, and GNP. What can we as players in the manufacturing and agricultural industry do, and what is the role of government. Mr. Intim didn't direct it to anybody, but I will graciously direct it to Dr. Andani for you. So, Doc.
Thank you very much. I think that is fundamental, and that, what we call crisis for me is a great opportunity for Ghana. And I love agriculture. And as AB said before he left, we have 5,000 opportunities, and he listed them. I don't think he got to 100, but there are 5,000 plus. So if we took just agriculture, in any government's 4-year tenure, you have 8, and there are several things in agriculture. Please, let's not specialize in everything. We would have to be domestically self-sufficient in everything we consume, but create specialization in no more than 5 areas. If we take rice, and I think it was Doc who mentioned data. There isn't any national reliable data that says there's the total volume of maize, rice. It's all anecdotal based on import numbers. But agriculture evolves from a market to the farm, not the farm to the market. What has let us all down is the farm to the market. You have very clear statistics on what is required, when it is required, in what form it is required, at what price. Then when you have that, you can work it all the way back through the value chain to the farm. And that's how financing evolves. Most people will say, oh, banks don't give money to agriculture. It's not true. It's not true that there's just no infrastructure in between to support that. So I think we can choose to be very focal. Let's do agriculture. Let's do agro-business. Let's do technology. These are low-hanging fruits. And we could, at least within even the government's 4-year cycle, focused, cut down all the other programs, and provide incentives to the private sector. We can achieve some modicum of a beginning of industrialization, a beginning of some self-sufficiency. I always say that you have 52 weeks in a year. In a 4-year government, you have more than 200 plus weeks. It takes only 6 weeks to 7 weeks for a broiler bird to be produced. And if, as Obasanjo said, then the IMF said we couldn't produce poultry, can they say that? Can they say that now? COVID and all the disruptions means that food is now a security thing. It's not just, it's a security and a sovereignty thing. It's part of our sovereign responsibility, not only investment. So in 52 weeks in a year, you can have several cycles of broiler production. And within 4 years, you should be able to phase out importation of chicken, create that huge value chain. And I have a background in agriculture that tells you need eggs, chicks, you need feed, you need the employment opportunities along that chain is huge. We will get better and drop the price. But if you start today to say that, oh, imported broiler is 10 cedis, local broiler is 15 cedis, let's import, you are just defeating yourself. Most of what we have here as imports are subsidized anyway. Tell me what is the cost of toothpick that you can land it in Ghana and sell it for 2 pesos. So let's be careful. So I think that just back to government changing fundamentally the Gaggisberg economy. Let's choose our winners. I think that our winners should be, use the 80-20 rule. What are those 20% of items that consumes 80% of our total foreign exchange, and attack them over a consistent period? And then we should be able to make some changes.
Okay. So again on agriculture, I wrote a paper for government which formed the basis of the now buffer stock company. But what we do now is not what the paper says. Buffer stock was supposed to be a company that had climate-controlled warehouses around the country, climate-controlled trucks, that at the beginning of the planting season, together with the Ministry of Agric, guarantee prices for items that are produced, mobilized, and and bought at those prices. So before the farmer even put the seed in the ground, the farmer knows how much he's going to get, which will then help banks, which will link to the rural banks, so that when these things are produced, you can pick them, put them in climate control trucks, and deliver them to climate control centers, so that the woman in Agbogboloshi does not have to go to Tamale, but only goes to the climate control center and picks his things and goes to sell. That was the idea of buffer stock. When it was implemented, actually, I wrote the document. I gave it to them. The first time, I was paid off, actually. I wasn't even on the board. I was paid off. That's another story. I was paid off. And they set it up. They ran it for a while. I don't know what happened. Later on, I was brought back onto the board to see what could be done. And then later on, now it's free SHS, food supplies. And that's not why we were set up. No. We were set up, as he said, to make agric market to farm gate and not the other way around. Where are the climate control tracks? Where are the climate controlled warehouses for which we can hope? Because we still have huge post-harvest losses. If you go and get data from Ministry of Agric, they will tell you, oh, it's like this, it's like that. But when you go to the market yourself, and I like to roam a lot. For someone who goes to the Sahara, you can see I roam a lot. Just to go and see what's going on. We are still losing huge swathes of our farm produce when we harvest them. So there's a lot of room for agricultural distribution. If I wish we had lots of grants like the grants you're pointing out in that direction for them, so we can all apply, because we still need it. In Accra now, our means of food distribution is still trucks coming in daily from market areas. There is no place where we store anything in Accra. So if one day we block the roads and for 1 week food cannot come in Accra, how can we do that? We can run an economy like that. There should be a place protected by security where we store all the food so that we know we can pick from there. When you go to China, their buffer stock is a security zone. Planes don't even fly over it, because that is how it is. They put them all away and they hold it. And every year they release it and they put new ones there. And every year they release and put new one there. But at the moment, what do? We only hold stocks for West Africa, very little of it. We ourselves, what do we hold? It's a real matter that needs to be tackled. But the other thing about industry is that without manufacturing, you will never develop. That one, we have to put it in our head. And the idea of, we started it. We talked about these, incubation centers, these industrialized centers, where we had them in every region. They were producing. I remember they made something for my palm oil farm, which you could use to mill the oil and get something. What has happened to them? How much money are we giving them to make the farms, to make those equipment? It was Aprotec, was that the name? Aprotec, they were giving us those equipments to do it. Now, they have a little, they are doing something now. You can mill corn without going to the corn mill. You can shell the corn. They have these small things for shelling. But we need to put more into that. And I think that is the way to get all these young men off the streets. At CDH, we do have a program for street children. If I walk to the streets right now with you, just across to this junction here, you will see the number of street children who will come to us. We take some to school, we give some training, but some are simply out of train. And I must say, there are some we take to school, and interesting, I met a gentleman here, Village of Hope. We take so many to him. Please, can we give him a round of applause for me? Dr. Fred takes a lot of our students, of our people from us from the streets. But I was telling him, it's like a factory. The more you take off the streets, the more they appear. And it's a security issue. And these boys, trust you me, they can do marvelous things. Some of them have not been to school but are very smart. Some too criminally. One day I put a pole this length. 2 of them held it. And they needed to go to the second floor of a building. 2 of them just held the pole like that. A simple pole. And the guy went on it like this and climbed and got up there. I said, wow. If you leave your door unshut on the first floor of the building, he will get through. And these are the people are running around, and we need to take a very active look. Otherwise, it's just a bomb we are sitting on.
Thank you very much. Nama, you have a point there? You have a supplementary point? Yes.
Yes. So I was going to say that, the fact that the city has depreciated is potentially an opportunity for light industrial, light manufacturing. These very sort of simple, entry level, doesn't require a lot of capital. Maybe now, because importing things is a lot more expensive and it doesn't make sense, maybe now there's space for us to start to develop some of these things, taking the raw materials and processing them to, adding one's level of value and maybe exporting those as opposed to what we've been doing.
Please, a round of applause for our panelists. One thing that has really stuck with me throughout this conversation, I think David mentioned that leaders regret not implementing the vision. And almost as if it was planned, Doc also mentioned about staying with the vision. Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, says you should be fastidious about the vision and flexible about the process. So you have a path you want to use to get to a certain destination, which is the vision you want. In times of crisis, we may have to navigate and find different ways of getting to that destination, that vision that we've set. But we should be very fastidious about it and make sure, whatever the case is, we stay with the vision. I'm very excited, gentlemen and lady, for your time. I'm very grateful, excited about the insights you've shared with us. I suppose the executive team will do a proper vote of thanks. I'd like to really express my own profound gratitude for your time. This has been very exciting for me, and I'm sure for the rest of my colleagues, members of the network, and for all the persons listening to us online. You've done a great service to the nation. Thank you very, very much. At this point, I would like to draw the curtain down on the panel discussion. I see Daniel is not happy about it. I'm not sure whether there are questions we are unable to take because I was given a hard stop at 1. So thank you very, very much. Please, a round of applause for our panelists.
Okay, so at this time, we'll invite Kesua AEC of Prime Care Medical Center to give the vote of thanks. After that, we'll take a group picture before we go for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. Distinguished speakers, panelists, SST and Ghana executives. It is indeed a privilege to be given the opportunity to deliver the vote of thanks on this very important occasion. And we thank the good Lord for the gift of life to be able to participate in this conference. It's been very insightful. And on behalf of Stanford Seed Network Ghana, partners, sponsors, leaders of business, and the entire fraternity of industry here together, and on my own behalf, I extend a warm vote of thanks to all our speakers. It's been very insightful. We have all learned a lot. And importantly, hope has once again been ignited in us. I believe that in this period, for us business leaders and transformers, what we need is hope to be able to put up on this very journey. And we are grateful. You have done just that. We've learned a lot. We'll never waste this good crisis. We have learned that the time is coming where we'll manage work and not workers, and we are mindful of that. And we are particularly also excited about the fact that, and I'm particularly interested, there are a lot of grant funding and all manner of funding available. We have learned so much, and we are saying thank you for these perspectives and the opinions you have shared with us. We are giving you our word that it will not go waste, and that we'll pick it up and we'll move forward from here and transform our organizations, and for that matter, Ghana. We'll do the best we can to ensure that the fundamentals are changed and we get it right as a nation. Thank you very much, our speakers and panelists. We would also at this time express our deep appreciation to our partners and sponsors. Stanford Seed, they are Spectra Global, Type Company, the Automation Group Ghana, Emigo Ghana, Design and Technology Institute, Joysam Limited, Inkulenu Industries, Paradox, Happy Kids School, Incept Architectural Consult, Cleaning Solutions Limited, African Concrete Products Limited, and Ghana Stock Exchange. We are saying that we could not do this without you, and we are very grateful. Finally, we'd like to take this opportunity to extend a hearty thanks to the STN Ghana executive for this perfect organization. We know that programs like this don't start overnight. It involves a stretch of all capabilities, but you did it, and we have all benefited enormously from it and from your hard work. And so let's give them a round of applause. Thanks to everybody here presented. God bless us all, and God help us as a nation. Thank you.
Okay, so we need to take a group picture. But Linda, are we going to do the presentations here? Okay. So we'll have a group picture, and I guess it's going to be here. So please let's come together and have a picture for Stanford.
Since 1989, the Ghana Stock Exchange has brought together companies and investors to forward business growth.
Listing on the Ghana Stock Exchange helps companies raise much needed long-term capital to finance strategic business objectives. Going public also institutes good corporate governance and sound business processes, which helps sustainability and continuity of businesses.
And that's what we are about on the trading floor. The one goal is to make sure things work out for our business partners. And with the same expertise, we invite individuals to come buy shares on the Ghana Stock Exchange so that we can bring everyday people closer to the good fortunes they dream of. Come, do business with the Ghana Stock Exchange, where you can raise long-term capital for your business or buy shares. It's your time.
Talk to a licensed stockbroker for more information. Ghana Stock Exchange, bringing companies and investors together since 1989.
Meet Kwame. He's a young executive who works long hours. His schedule makes it difficult for him to get a sit-down meal. He needs a quick fix meal which is healthy and wholesome. Yummy probiotic yogurt. It's creamy, delicious, and rich in proteins that are easily absorbed by your body. Yummy is that wholesome drinking yogurt that provides energy and vitality to make you come alive. Grab a cold bottle of Yummy at a shop near you and let the healthy feeling kick in. Available in different flavors. Yummy yogurt. Always different, truly different.
Your days of yearning for those home-tasting meals are over. You can now make palm soup conveniently from the comfort of your home with Inkulenu's Palm Soup Base. Or pick a bottle of deliciously fresh Inkulenu's Palm Drink. Inkulenu has now added mouth-watering Gar Kenke, Fanti Kenke, Banku, and chopped dry contemporary leaves to its home products. All Inkulenu products are produced under strict hygienic conditions with no chemical preservatives. Inkulenu, original Ghanaian taste.